Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar today using Captivate 2017 Fluid Boxes with drag and drop interactions. I'm Adam Cannon, an e-learning evangelist specializing in Captivate and Storyline here at eLearning Brothers. We're glad to have you with us, and we're especially glad to have with us Paul Wilson, who is a renowned Captivate expert, has a great YouTube channel and things, and we'll let him tell more about himself. Sorry, I'll get over here then where you can see me better. Anyway, yes, thank you for joining us. We'll be about an hour. Please ask your questions as you go. We will try to take breaks along the way to answer any questions that come up. This is being recorded, and it will also be published as part of a webinar recap on Monday on the eLearning Brothers blog. And so you can find that information there. The recording and will be sent out to all registered attendees after just a few hours after we're done. So we'll, with that being said, we'll hand everything over to Paul and let him take over. Thanks, Paul.
Hey guys, really glad to be here today. Hopefully I'll be able to share some of my Adobe Captivate Fluid Box secrets, specifically with regards to drag and drop. In fact, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this webinar, was that when Captivate 27 first came out, it became very obvious to me that there was nothing in any of the templates that, or themes rather, that included fluid boxes. So we were really on our own. And so very quickly, early on in the process of getting up to speed with 2017, I had to figure a few things out along the way, some trials and tribulations. So I think what I'll do now is I'll share my screen with you and show you what I've come across, and maybe just some general drag and drop hints and tips today that should provide you some really useful interactions for your learners. So let's take a look at my screen here. Guys, can you see my Adobe Captivate screen right there? Can we just confirm that maybe?
I can see it, Paul, and looks like several people are answering yes on the in the audience. So
perfect. So one of the first things that you know, when I was introduced to fluid boxes, you know, the first thing I thought, well, how do I organize this information? And I think it's really important that you plan. Planning is everything. Storyboarding, or even if you're just a developer and you're taking someone else's storyboard, you really need to plan ahead of time. So you just can't, with fluid boxes, you just can't throw a bunch of fluid boxes on the screen and hope that it's going to come out okay. So looking at a few of my storyboards that came out around the time that Captivate 27 came out, I started to look at what sort of arrangements I would need. And generally speaking, I've sort of fallen on a vertical arrangement, but remember, of course, you also have horizontal arrangements that you can do as well. So I'm going to go ahead here and create a typical question slide, or in this case, a typical drag and drop slide that I would include. So I just start off by clicking on the vertical layout here, and I just sort of, you know, almost like a checklist. I'm looking at my storyboard. I need a space for my title. I need a space maybe for the question stem or the instructions, whatever it might be. The third fluid box for me is where the actual interaction will go. And I like to leave space for my captions, my feedback captions, you know, correct, incorrect, try again, that sort of thing. And then possibly some room for the navigation controls along the bottom. Sometimes, if you want to leave room for things like closed captioning, you can go down to 6 vertical fluid boxes, but 5 works as well. So I'm going to stick with 5 for this demo today here. And what we'll do is we'll just build our first drag and drop fluid box, and I'll take you through the process here. Right off the bat, I'm going to change my layout a little bit because I don't want them to be all equal like this. I just need a small space for the title up top, and we'll just bring up the area for the where the instructions or the question will go. And similarly, I'm going to just shrink down the space I'm leaving for my navigation controls and for my captions down below there. So now I have a nice large space in the middle where I can do a drag and drop. Now, if you were in attendance with the last webinar that I watched with Elearning Brothers with Pooja Jasing, you would have learned that you can actually put fluid boxes within other fluid boxes. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here, because I'm going to drag some items from the left-hand side of my screen over to the right-hand side of my screen. And I want to keep them separate from one another. So I'm going to go into fluid boxes again here. And we'll choose a horizontal layout. And I've sort of gone back and forth on this. Sometimes you can kind of go with 3, with the middle one being a spacer or just something to keep the left and right columns of draggables separate from one another. But you can actually achieve something similar with horizontal and vertical padding. So I'm going to try 2 in this case here. And we'll just do a nice simple drag and drop here. So let's start populating this with some stuff. So I'm going to pre-select my fluid box at the top here, and I'm just going to pop in a text caption. That's going to be one of the old style halo blues just because of the theme I've got going here, but let me switch that to transparent. We'll bump up the font a little bit here so it's nice and large, and we'll just give this a title. Similarly, we can go to the next fluid box, and again, selecting it makes it easy for inputting anything like text captions. I could be using smart shapes here as well. It doesn't matter. Just a old habit to use text captions, but you could pop in smart shapes as well. Again, I'm just going to switch that to a transparent style. And we'll say here, drag and drop the items on the left to the correct items on the right. I don't even know what this is going to be yet, so we'll make it up as we go here. But again, planning is important. So we just bump that up here. And what you can do with the fluid box selector, you can select sort of the parent fluid box of these 2 inner fluid boxes, or child fluid boxes, if you will, and then select the padding for horizontal to create a little space between all of them, the sides as well as the 2 fluid boxes themselves. And you can even take this a step further and actually add additional padding to these fluid boxes as well. So, for example, you could add some vertical and horizontal here, and this will affect the objects once I put them on the page there. In fact, let's do that. Let's put let's use a smart shape for this here. So let's take a look. So you can see that if I play with the padding here, I can adjust how much space within that fluid box, what will ultimately be my draggable objects, and we'll just set that up accordingly here. And let's duplicate that a number of times. We'll go with 3 in this case here. I don't need them to be so skinny, so I'm going to uncheck maintain aspect ratio, and that should fill it out quite nicely there. And let's say I'm going to duplicate one more of these and drag it over to the other column. Make a couple copies of that, and again, we'll select the fluid box for that one there and just add a little padding just to give it some space around the edges there. I'm being somewhat arbitrary here, but you, of course, with your planning for this, you're going to want to make sure that you're making choices that make sense and match, of course, the other side as well. So let's say, for example, we're just going to do a very simple drag and drop where we're going to drag over the, for those that don't know, I'm Canadian, so I'm going to use Canadian political leaders. And Elizabeth May, and over here I'm going to put the political party they're a part of. Justin Trudeau is Liberal. Andrew Scheer represents the Conservatives. Hopefully my spelling is good. And Elizabeth May, Green Party. Yes, we have a Green Party in Canada. And that's pretty much it. I mean, there's really not a lot of magic that's happening here. One of the things that you might want to do, or my advice with this, is obviously to create some style to distinguish these from one another. So maybe we'll make those a darker shade with a lighter text. Let's bump up the font a little bit here. And you know what? I'm going to try something a little interesting here. Maybe what we can do is we'll align these to the left. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of margin on the left there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my fluid boxes again, and I'm going to shrink down these guys on the left here so that they'll fit in this space here, and we can still see the name of the party as well. So let's try that, and we'll just select all of these drag objects here, and let's do something similar with the coloring. Let's choose a lovely Canadian color like red, and to contrast that we'll use white letters, and again I'm going to bump up that font. So that's kind of cool there. We haven't even got into the drag and drop stuff, but we're just doing the layout stuff. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're working with fluid boxes is take a close look at your properties panel and take a look at some of the settings here. The one thing I really want to draw your attention to is this minimum font size here and this checkbox for Enable Uniform Text Scaling. In Adobe Captivate 2017, you have the ability to scale your text depending on the size of the screen that you're previewing this project on. One of the things that you're going to want to do is, of course, all of these items here may scale up and down at different rates or different sizes depending on how much space they're taking up. So you probably want to check off Enable Uniform Text Scaling. That'll make sure they look nice and they match each other nicely. You know, for example, conservatives is a longer word, and it might shrink that font down before it gets to the Liberal Party. So let's try a few things out here. So a couple things I'm going to want to do. Like if you were to drag the preview slider, that's not a really desirable result there. We want to keep maybe things from left to right. So one of the things that I discovered with drag and drop quite early on, if I go and select, go back to the fluid box selector here, a couple things you can do. What I would recommend for interactions such as this is I would switch all of these different fluid boxes to, or from, wrap to next column to squeeze in a column. And the end result is that you'll get things to be a little bit more predictable for you. So I'm going to make a few changes here. I'm actually just selecting each of my fluid boxes and changing them all to squeeze in a row. Especially important here with the drag and drop items themselves. So let's just keep those in the same configuration. This is, I actually almost wish that Adobe put this as the default rather than wrap to next row. Squeeze and column seems to be a little bit more natural looking. And then, of course, in certain circumstances, you could change it to one of the other configurations. Incidentally, if you want to have control, you'll notice here that I have a percentage on my wrap point here. I should have mentioned this up front. One of the things that I like to do when I'm dealing with any kind of fluid boxes is go into Preferences, and underneath Defaults you'll see an entry for Enable Wrap Point. Normally when this is unchecked, which is the default state, the wrap point. In other words, at what percentage of the screen being consumed by your fluid boxes will it wrap to the next row. It could be 50%, it could be 80%, it could be anything less than 100% basically. And normally you only have the ability to select the parent level fluid box. But if you check this off, you can check off all of your fluid boxes and be able to select a different percentage for different fluid boxes. It does give you a bit more flexibility. I don't know if I can tell you a specific example of how you would use that, but what I would say is that with experience comes predictability with fluid boxes. So turning that on and playing around with it will give you a new experience. Anyway, let's get into drag and drops. We've been talking about fluid boxes long enough here. For those that don't know, drag and drops in Adobe Captivate, whether you're using 2017 or using Captivate 9, Captivate 8 for that matter. No, was it in 8? Yeah, I think it was. Is through the, it's done very simply through a 3-step process that you can access from your interactions icon from the toolbar, and just simply choose drag and drop here. So let's bring that up. The first step, well, the first step actually is a submit a button up here. So you may need to move that to a position where it's out of the way. In this case here, I'm going to put it down into that navigation area just to get it out of the way. Step 1 is to select all of your drag sources by clicking on them. So here we have Justin Trudeau, Andrew Scheer, Elizabeth May. And now I hit next. And now I'm going to select the drop targets. These are the political parties that they represent. Liberal, Conservative, and Green Party. And then I hit next again. And the final step, step 3, we need to specify the correct answers by mapping the drag sources to the correct drop targets. So all we need to do is drag this little icon that you see in the middle of Justin Trudeau and line them up with Liberal. Now at this point, a success caption will appear, as well as a failure caption. I'm just going to move those while I'm here out of the way. This particular theme doesn't have a difference in styling, but we can change that later. And let's go back to Andrew Scheer and match him up with Conservatives, Elizabeth May, and to the Green Party there. So that looks pretty good. All I have to do now is hit Finish, and I basically have a fluid box drag and drop. Works really well. Now, of course, you might want to customize this a little bit, and I'll take you through some of the basics now. First of all, one-to-one relationships with the drag and drops are really not that challenging, nor are they very much fun. So we can actually now take this opportunity, and this is where Fluid Boxes works really well. I can drag this, and you'll see a little line as I move it into different positions. So I can essentially create a shuffle effect just by moving a few things around here. So let's mix it up a bit so we are challenging ourselves. That's pretty good.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a minute for a couple questions?
Sure, this would be a good time for it.
So there's a question that says, I'm trying to layer text over an image inside of a fluid box. Can I create that natively inside of Captivate, or would I have to create the image with text in Photoshop and import that in?
There's a couple of ways you could do it. Let's actually do an example of that right now. So in this case here, let's say, for example, I wanted to put a background image behind this particular fluid box arrangement. What I can do is I can select all of my fluid boxes, if you will. So if I go into fluid box selector here, and a little hint, by the way, so if you're having trouble getting the fluid box selector to appear, just drag from your scrap area, hold down your mouse key, and just sort of cross two different fluid boxes, and you'll get the parent level fluid box here. If you go over to Options, one of the things you can do is you can change the fill of the entire fluid box or just one of the fluid boxes if you wish. Like, to use the example that the viewer is asking about here, we could select just this question fluid box here, and under the Options tab of the Properties panel, I can go in here and select an image fill and have it be anything I wish. For example, I could do this airport background that I happen to have in there. Of course, it kind of it needs to contrast the text easier or better. So maybe black is not the best color for that. I'm not sure if this is a really good example, but let's try something a little bit different here. Alternatively, I could put in, let's go in and import something fresh, actually. Let me just find something. I'm sure there's always something in my downloads folder that we could use. This is a good one here. It's just a background image that creates a nice effect there, just to break up the white background. So that's one way you can do it. The other thing you can do, and this could be an example here, is you notice how I've got two captions, they're side by side. If that wasn't the effect I wanted, one of the things that you could do is change this particular fluid box to a static fluid box. And if you click on this little icon here, this little eye icon, and you'll see these a lot in Captivate 2017 with regards in particular to fluid boxes, there's new little sort of help icons that appear and give you a nice little extra bit of information that could be helpful to you. Static fluid boxes allows you to overlap objects that are supported, or actually pretty much any object is supported there. Additional state objects are also supported, so if you have multi-state objects, you could use static fluid boxes for those. And it also maintains the aspect ratio on wrap. So if you have, let's say you had 3 ovals, actually probably the classic example is if you had a map with pin points on the map, those would maintain their right location and their aspect ratio anytime that the static fluid box was moved or repositioned or resized. So that's the two-pronged answer I would give to that question there.
And you show that more in depth on one of your YouTube videos, don't you? The map example that you talked about.
Yeah, in fact, there's a really good example that I have on one of my YouTube videos. And for those that aren't aware, I have a YouTube channel where I'm currently dedicated. We'll see how it goes. But I'm currently dedicated to a new tutorial every week, plus a live stream once a week. So I do the live streams on Monday, and it's just an hour and a half of me answering Adobe Captivate questions. So I strongly encourage any of the viewers on today to subscribe to my channel. It's youtube.com/PaulWilsonLearning, all one word. And you can easily subscribe to the channel there.
And we'll make sure that link goes out as well with the email, with the recording and things.
Perfect, yeah. So, and there's, and that's the thing. In fact, a lot of what I'm covering today, if I'm moving too fast for you, or if I'm covering off a concept that you're not quite sure of, my YouTube channel is a great place to go to find out all of this stuff, because most of this has been covered in some other tutorial, maybe several different tutorials, but you know, again, if you're watching each of my tutorials as they come out weekly, you'll learn a lot about Captivate, that's for sure. I can promise you that. So,
okay. So one more question, and maybe you'll get to this in a minute. It says, I set up drag and drop for a series of 7 icons dragged over to a character asset. If you drag the items out of order, they snap back to a different position than they started. How do I get them to snap back to the same position they came from?
So that's a strange one. I've never had them go to anything other than where they started from. Maybe that's something we can sort of parking lot. and I'll see if I can find out. I certainly have some contacts at Adobe, and we'll see if we can find out. But my understanding is that they always go back to the original position. But we can look into that for you and see if that's something that we can figure out. But that's a new one. I haven't run into that before. Maybe it's just something I haven't tried. Was there any other questions, Adam?
Yes, there's one more. When should you decide to use fluid boxes versus responsive positioning relative in terms of the old way of doing it, where you would set up the pixels or the percentage in the breakpoint view?
That's actually a really good question. I've been toying with the idea of doing a video. I haven't quite been brave enough to do it yet because it's going to be a big topic to cover. And I was going to do a video tutorial sometime in the next month or two maybe that covers off fluid boxes versus responsive design. Or sorry, for more traditional breakpoint responsive design. Because I think there's value in both. And I think a lot of it comes down to looking at the requirements of your particular client. So if you're a freelance instructional designer developer like me, I think I'd really want to see, maybe some wire mock-ups from the client themselves. What do they have in mind? What does their e-learning look like? If you're dealing with any kind of layers, like if you've got characters standing in front of other characters who are standing in front of a background, I don't know that fluid boxes would be a good choice. If you're designing something relatively flat, like what I've got here for you guys today, fluid boxes is a great choice for that. If everything has its unique position and placement, I think fluid box is great. Certainly, fluid box is something that works really well with mobile. But the one thing to remember about the breakpoint style of responsive design is that it means that you're going to need to spend some time in each of those breakpoints. Whereas with fluid boxes, of course, I can just grab my preview selection handle and just sort of see what this looks like across the whole spectrum here. And as you can see, the way I've sort of designed this particular layout here, everything has its place, even when I'm going right down to mobile. And so that way it's a little, for me anyway, it's a little more predictable. Whereas with breakpoints, you've got, let's say, 3 to 5 breakpoints, depending on how you've configured Captivate. And not only do you need to check those breakpoints, but you're going to need to preview each of your slides and look at all the different points between those breakpoints as well. So I think that fluid box does lend itself well to a more rapid development time. But again, I think there's cases where you need to look at the material that you're going to be designing and developing for and make a decision based on that.
Thank you. And this might be a good time to just fire up those poll questions and just see how many people are using responsive design in fluid boxes.
Yeah, actually, that would be very interesting to find out. I'd be curious to know how many people have, I think the poll questions, if I recall them correctly here, we've got, are you presently designing with responsive design? And if so,
and then we'll let this one go, and then we'll jump to the next one here.
Sure. Because I know a lot of people have held off on responsive design. I know several of my clients. For those that don't know, part of what I do is I'm an e-learning designer developer, like probably most of you are. But in addition to that, I had no idea when I started making YouTube videos that it would lead to a second business, and that's providing instruction. And I do a lot of one-on-one instruction with people just like yourselves. And that's something that I'm available to hire for. So if you have a larger, broader e-learning project that maybe you want me to consult on, I certainly can do that. And you can visit my website at paulwilsonlearning.com, and all the information is there.
and we'll make sure that link goes out as well. We'll give you just like 5 more seconds to answer the poll, and then we'll switch to the next one. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you see, there's the results of that poll, Paul.
That's interesting. About 40 to 60%, 39% to 61%. So yeah, I think a lot of people are still going with standard projects, but I think you're going to find that more and more clients, like one of the things that one of my longtime clients, in fact, they were once my employer, was the Toronto International Airport. And they started off with a very closed, kind of old-fashioned learning management system. But they realized quite quickly that the 1,200 employees that they had were not their only responsibility. They had literally 40,000 potential people that they're responsible for. And these are just employees that work at the airport with different companies, you know, the limo drivers, the you know, the customer service personnel, the airlines themselves. And one thing that they discovered was that they had a whole crew of volunteers, mostly senior citizens, who came in and just helped people by giving directions and so forth and helping them get to their flights. But the volunteers were not employees, so they couldn't access the learning management system. So now suddenly they're talking to me about, hey, let's take the old training that we did and can we make it available on the internet so that they can access it from their smartphones or their tablets or whatever it is that they're using. So the world is changing, and I think we're going to see that more and more the expectation is going to be towards people like us having to very rapidly deliver a solution that works for mobile as well.
Yeah. All right, let's do the second poll question now, Andrew. So currently, are you using fluid boxes for your responsive design? So we'll give it a few seconds to answer that. And let me just address this while you're answering. We're getting a lot of questions come across, and some of them we'll shoot to Paul, and some of them we'll save either because they require a longer response or a little bit more research. And so we will try to answer or address all the questions, if not here, then certainly in the webinar recap that comes out on Monday as well. And like Paul has said, you can also find a lot of the answers on his YouTube channel, and we'll have all his links and everything that comes out in the email after this. So, all right, we'll give you 5 more seconds to answer the poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So that's even more interesting to me right there, is that 81% have not really jumped into the fluid box world. So that's interesting. I'd like to encourage everyone to spend some time playing with it. Don't put yourself under stress. You know, I had an experience very early on in my career, back long before fluid boxes or responsive design. And I was a new instructional designer developing some e-learning, and one of my more senior colleagues came up to me and looked over my shoulder and said, "Paul, what are you doing? You're working on trying to come up with some kind of crazy solution here, and it's and I said, well, I just really want my e-learning to be the best e-learning I can possibly make it." And he said, "That's commendable, but you know, you have a deadline for like next Friday. Now's not the time to reinvent e-learning. Now's the time to go with what you know, get it out there, publish the course, and get it delivered to the audience." And you know, I've sort of taken that to heart, and I see a lot of times, especially on the forums and things like that, people are like constantly saying things like, "I've got a deadline of Friday and I don't know how to do this particular interaction." When you have your downtime, and I know downtime is a rarity, when you have your downtime, that's when you should be playing around with fluid boxes and figuring out what it can do for you. And that's what I do. Is like, you know, I'm not always as busy as I am right now, for example, so I'll spend some time playing with fluid boxes later on and learn new things all the time. So sometimes it's the client who challenges you, but you know, certainly when when you have a deadline, you should stick to what you know. But for sure, you know, this is hopefully for those that are aware, this is a great opportunity. These sorts of webinars that the eLearning Brothers put on, I'm a big believer of, you know, every now and then you got to sharpen the saw. And for those that know Stephen Covey, they'll know what I'm talking about there. So things like this is a great way to just get your skills ramped up, and hopefully you can start using some of these cool new features.
And I would add that I think maybe some of the reason that that number was so high that is there's still a lot of people who haven't yet moved over to 2017.
Well, that's true.
On Captivate 9, but
that makes sense. Yeah.
Like Paul said, I would encourage you, even if you're just taking a demo, you know, download the demo version of 2017 and learn to play with it so that you are sharpening the saw and staying ahead of things. But Paul, we'll let you go ahead and continue. We'll jump in later with more questions.
Yeah, I'll actually just add one last thing before I get back into this drag and drop here, is that if you take a look at my latest post, both on my YouTube channel but also on the Adobe eLearning community site, you'll see me talk about sort of a secret thing that I'm aware of and I kind of like to promote. You know, the 30-day trial from Adobe is fantastic, but it's not long enough, let's face it. So one of the hints and tips that I can give you, I won't go through all the details right now, but through participation at the Adobe eLearning community site, you can accumulate points and eventually get literally complimentary software from them. So check that out. Check out my latest video about that, and even go so far as to maybe even get you a free trip to Las Vegas. So worth watching, I think. Anyway, I've certainly flown on their dime a few times because of my participation in the community. So it certainly helps out. But anyway, we've got a drag and drop here. It's ready to go. But there are some things that I think that are useful for just, you know, improving it a little bit. And these aren't necessarily new to Captivate 2017. You can do much of this still in Captivate 9. And you know, some of these controls are available for you. And I think Captivate 8 is a little bit different with the drag and drop, but it's available there as well. So again, remember how I wanted to have the answers, these drag objects, go to the right-hand side of these drop targets here. So that's easy to do with your drag and drop panel open. Couple things that you can do. If you go to the Format tab, you'll see you've got the snap behavior here. And this is where you can choose how this will anchor to this. Right now it's going to show up in the center here, and I can just do a quick preview of that. We'll just see that in action here. I'll just do the preview up here. So if I drag Elizabeth May over to the green party here, again, it's snapping to the middle. It's not really the effect I was looking for. So let's just close that and change this. So maybe we could just choose probably anything along the right-hand side will work nicely for that. And you can do that for each one of these drop targets to make sure that it gives you a nice little effect there. Also, too, you can add sort of like a pickup and a drop-down effect with your draggable items. So I'm going to select all of my draggable items, and you'll see I've got this effects drop-down underneath the Format tab of the drag and drop panel. This will create a zoom-in effect. It's not really the word I would use, but it'll give you the sense that you're picking something up because it'll get larger. And as you drop it on the drop target, it will drop down into that position. So that's kind of a neat effect to just improve the drag and drop appearance. And what we'll do here is we'll also do a few options for you just kind of go over these panel information items here so you can see what each one does. So again, there's that. Certainly, it depends on what you have selected, but if I select my drag objects, that's the zoom in effect I just told you about. If you select your drop targets, you can choose the same zoom in effect. I think there's also a glow effect And what else do we have here? Your on success, more often than not, is going to be left at continue. But I want you to think about this because there's the possibility to do so much more. So on success, you could just have it continue playing the rest of your project, and that's probably what you might do. On failure, you could take advantage of the fact that Captivate's very good at remediation and have it go back to where this information may have been taught in the first place. But also consider the fact that you can do, let's say, an advanced action, and I won't get into that today, but your advanced action could do a whole bunch of things, like not only display the caption, but maybe different navigation controls or show additional information on the screen. And I have videos about that as well on my YouTube channel. I'm just going to put this back to continue. Obviously, you can give users multiple attempts. So if you wanted to give them 3 tries to get this correct, and then of course that opens up the possibility of, do you want it to reset the question or not? So we could reset everything back to normal. There's a pause point here, 1.5 seconds, so a 3-second slide. This will pause and wait for the users to complete the interaction. You can choose to auto-submit the correct answer, so if they get it right, they don't have to wait until they click on submit. But you can add additional controls too, like an undo the last action, and that will create a button for that, which you can then move down to your navigation controls here. But you can also have it reset the entire interaction as well. And that reminds me of something to remember about drag and drops. They're actually a great knowledge check because they actually will completely reset themselves every time you visit this slide. So if you return to this slide, everything's not going to be all messed up. It's going to return back to the original on-enter setup of all of your drag and drop objects. So it works quite well that way, and I've used it probably more often as a knowledge check rather than as an actual quiz question slide. Under the Options tab here, you'll see use a hand cursor. That'll give you the effect of not just a regular mouse pointer, and you can actually, and this may be an answer to that earlier question, Adam. I never thought about this, but this is always the default. Send the drag source to the original position. Perhaps that's unchecked in that particular person's question, and that might fix it just by checking that off. You can add audio, of course, to your drag and drops. Here's something that I almost think should be turned on by default, and this is redrag the dropped source. And what this means, if I check this off, if I drag Elizabeth May over to the Liberal Party, but I meant the Conservative Party, which in either case that would be wrong, I could change my mind and then pick it up from where I dropped it and place it in another position. So that's a useful checkbox to have checked off for a lot of your interactions. So hopefully that answers some questions there. I want to show you guys a couple of things that that might expand your use of drag and drops. Here's another example of pretty much the same question here. I'm going to actually jump to this one here. So here I've set up what I consider to be a sequencing question. This would be really good for, let's say, a customer service scenario. My job as an airport employee, and this is really from a course that I did, is to help customers with a set of steps that the customer needs to perform, or in this case, passenger needs to perform. So I can set up a drag and drop here for this, and this is going to be very much like what we've seen already. Let me quickly set that up, but I'll show you one thing that you can do to make this a little bit better. So again, it's a very simple 3-step process. We're going to select my drag objects over here, one by one. Click Next. Now I'm going to select my drop targets and click Next. And We'll just put these, they are presently in order, but I'll jumble them up later. So, and my success caption is shown up here. So let's move the submit button. Let's try to move my submit button down to the bottom here. There we go. And we'll move these captions to this space down here, just so they're out of the way. Okay, so let's select this guy here and put him there. This is the 4-step process that passengers, in this scenario is passengers who've arrived from an international location and arrived in Toronto, but they're going on to, let's say, Vancouver, Thunder Bay, Ottawa, some other location. So they need to follow this 4-step process. Now, if I'm a customer service agent, I'm not going to tell you this out of order. I'm going to tell it to you in the correct order. So to make this a little bit more experiential, and when I say experiential, I mean more like real life, I don't want users to drag item 4 first and then drag item 2 just because they remember it. I want them to remember it in the correct order. So you can actually enforce that. And what we can do here is go to Set Correct Answers from our Options tab. And if I'd properly labeled these objects, which I didn't, and I apologize for that, I could very clearly see the name of each drag object and drop target. But here's the interesting thing, is that the default correct answer in your drag and drop option or interaction is to do a combination. In other words, I could do number 4 first, and then I could do the second one next, and then I could do the third one, and then do the first one last if I wanted to. But if you select sequence from this drop-down menu here, you can enforce that the user must do it in the correct order. In other words, they have to tell the, this is a scenario where David is asking for help. He doesn't know what the steps are. So we have to do customs first, and then we have to do scan his boarding pass at the kiosk next. And of course, I would jumble these up to make it more random. But this enforces and gets users in the practice of remembering this 4-step process in the correct order. Maybe anyone have any questions about that? It's pretty straightforward, but this is a really powerful little button right here that allows you to go in and change how this drag and drop functions.
So there aren't questions specifically about that topic, but there are a couple of questions.
Sure.
One of them has to do with master slides. Like, can you have, say, 10 drag and drops that want to look the same? Can you do it on a master slide?
Yeah, you can. In fact, Fluidbox is first and foremost with most themes. There isn't, and this is where I sort of thought there was an opportunity here, but there's a lot of themes that include fluid boxes right on the master slide. So you could design quite easily. You could design your particular interaction that you know you're going to use more than once. Get the fluid box arrangement set up on your master slide. I'm doing it here on the actual slide itself, but there's nothing to say, much like any other, like this is just a standard multiple choice question slide. It's already got the fluid boxes in there, but there's nothing to say you can't make your own fluid boxes. So you could easily start off with a blank one like this, and then add your fluid boxes. Well, I think it has to be, I don't think it can be this slide, but because I think blank needs to be blank. But you could set up, let's just duplicate that, call this something else. So from here I could build that same, let's say, 5 fluid box design very quickly. And let's split this down the middle. So I've got my my two columns in the middle here. And this, what happens is from the film strip, if I'm making a new fluid box, or sorry, a new slide, I can insert, I called it something else, literally. There we go. I need another one of these. Insert, new slide from something else. So now I have two that are set up already, you know, and I would do further customization, like maybe create a special background for my drag and drops, or build some of the things already in place, like placeholders for your title and your question and so on. So yeah, for sure, that's definitely something that can be done.
Good. And then a couple of questions on the sequence and combination steps that you just showed. Is the sequence order defined by the actions or by the target sequence?
It's actually, that's a good question. It'll be sequenced in the order that they appear here. So if I have, and I'm not sure which one's which here, but if I wanted to change that order, I could move those selected rows and columns. This is why labeling your objects is so important. Don't be lazy like me.
And then another, somebody asks, if you enforce the sequencing in a drag and drop question like that, can't the learner just click until one box moves and then they know to drag that to the number one space? I feel like you wouldn't necessarily have to understand what was on the drag target to get that question correct.
Well, let's do an example here. Now, I've probably messed this up already. Let me just hit cancel. What would happen is that they have to hit submit with all of them dragged over first. So in the way this is configured, if I was to preview the next 5 slides here, and hopefully I didn't move them out of sequence, I can't remember if I did that. Again, labeling your objects is so important. I can't emphasize that enough. So if I drag this over into the wrong order, hit submit, I'm getting my failure caption there. I could, of course, set this up to give, let's do 3 attempts, and we'll automatically reset everything back to where it started here. So if I did this, even if it's correct, let's do it this way. Next 5 slides. So what's going to happen is I have to see, yeah, I guess in theory someone could keep trying until they get it right. But with 4 possibilities going into 4 things, it's probably going to take them more than 3 tries to do that. So if I do this in the wrong order, and again I would set up the layout to snap to the right-hand side there, I'm still getting the failure message. So I have to do it in the correct order, and that's what it's enforcing. It's getting people to remember this process in the correct order. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, yeah, that looks like it does. Okay, we've just got a few minutes left, and so we'll let you wrap up. Some of the questions, again, if we don't get to them, we will make sure that we address them later in the webinar recap that will come out on Monday on the eLearning Brothers blog page.
Sure. I want to share one last thing. I was going to do another one as well, but I think this one, if there's time, maybe we'll do 2, but we'll see how our time is there. We're just running out of time here. But I want to emphasize that drag and drop can be used not just as a knowledge check or a question slide, but it can just be used as an interaction to do something a little bit more interesting than just presenting those 4 steps, for example. So in this case here, you know, what I've got here, and I'll just do a quick drag and drop here, but what we're going to do is we're going to change this a little bit here. What I've done is these are my drag items here. Going to go next. I'm going to select this passport. We're going to drag these immigration stamps into the passport, and they're all correct answers because they're all going to the same spot. Let me just get rid of that caption. We'll temporarily put it down there. And again, if we don't have time to cover all the details of this, there is a tutorial of almost this exact interaction on my YouTube channel there. So we'll finish that off, And what I'm going to do in this case here is I'm actually going to turn off the failure and success captions and grab the submit button and put it, well actually you need to unlock it from FluidBox first and have it outside in the scrap area so there is no submit button. And instead what we do is we've got these 4 steps, and instead of using them to test your knowledge, we're going to be using them to display more information. So let me show you how this will work here. If I click on the passport, that's my my drop target here, and I'm going to go into the Format tab, and we're going to click on Object Actions here. And this is really cool. What I can do is I've got it currently would allow me to drag all 4 of these objects over to the passport. I'm going to uncheck Accept All and only allow 1 item. And what happens if something's already there? I want it to replace what's already there. And what we're going to do is do something a little interesting here. I've got this multi-state object down here with information on those additional states. I'm going to use the action of each drag and drop to do something a little bit different for each of these 4 steps. So I'm going to change the state of the information area object, so I named it properly, that's good. To step 1, I'm going to uncheck continue playing this project and do the same thing real quick for these other items here. Uncheck continue playing the project. Oops, I think I did that wrong. Bear with me a moment. This is a neat way to use drag and drop for something other than just a typical knowledge check or question. Change state of that to step 4, uncheck that. And then of course the user can click next when they're done. Let's preview this and see how this works. You know, and I think this is just another example of where we're taking a situation and we're kind of using the theme of being at an airport. These are Canadian immigration stamps. Don't tell the government I use their stamp here. But if I drag step 1 over to the passport here, it changes the state of this object down here and puts further detail into what step 1 is. If I drag step 2 over, it updates this, sends the first one back. So that's kind of cool, and it's a different way to use, of course, the drag and drop functionality. So just thought I'd share that one with you. If we've got just a moment or two, I want to talk a little bit about one other aspect, and I won't be able to demo this in the time we have left, but here's an example where you have multiple objects that are going to different locations, and in a case like this where I've got, let's say, a Florida object, it's going to go to one of these 4 drop targets. All of them are correct. What you can do when you're building your drag and drop is assign it to a type, in this case here. And I just want to show this real quick here. So I'm going to select, I've got Canadian provinces and American provinces. Your job is to put them in the correct side or correct column. So I'm going to select all my Floridas. It's important to press the Shift key while you do this. So I'm selecting, let's get rid of this guy here first of all. I promise everyone this will be worth it. This is cool. So I'm going to select Florida, hold down my Shift key. We'll select all the U.S. states here, Utah, Ohio, and that's it. And I'm going to click on plus, and we're going to call this States Drag. So we're grouping them together essentially. Now I'm going to do the same thing and click in the scrap area to make sure I'm unselected. Hold down my Shift key. Now I'm going to choose all the Canadian provinces. Click the plus key here, and we're going to say provinces, drag, And now we'll hit next. And I'll select the drop targets for all my Canadian provinces. Again, I got to hold down the Shift key while I do this. And we'll say provinces drop. I'm just going to click away and then click the American States column. Hold down the Shift key while I select these and add these to U.S. States drop. It almost doesn't matter what you call it. But here's the cool part, right? Because like Florida could go here, but it could also go here, and it could also go here, and it could also go there. So when I go next, it's going to want me to identify the relationship. So that would be a lot of dragging and dropping to set up all those possibilities. Watch what happens now that I've grouped them according to type like this. If I grab Florida and I select any one of these American states drop locations, bam, all the possibilities are covered up there. Same thing with, and of course it did New York, it did Utah and Ohio as well. Now I do the Canadian provinces. And same thing. So it covers all the possibilities. It's a great way when you have multiple locations that are all the correct answer. And I'll let you guys play with that if you get a chance. And this is applicable to even Captivate 9. Not sure about Captivate 8. I don't remember using it back then. But certainly Captivate 9, you could do the same thing. And like I said, there's a video on my YouTube channel. If I went too fast, I apologize. But I really wanted to squeeze that example in as well. So that's it for me, Adam. Unless anyone has some great questions to ask me, I'm happy to answer those.
What I think I'll do is I'll send you some of the questions via email, and maybe you can use them in a YouTube topic later, as well as we'll address them on the webinar. Just because we're running out of time and we're starting to lose people. So. I want to say thank you from eLearning Brothers. I want to say thank you to Paul, and we appreciate his expertise and knowledge. Please make sure you check out his website as well as the eLearning Brothers website, where there are lots of free templates for Captivate, but also for all your e-learning needs, assets and tools. And one of our newest features is a customizable courseware, which is pre-built courses in soft skills areas that you can upload right to your LMS as is, or we can give you the source files in Captivate and Storyline and Lectora as well that you can customize and do what you need to with yours. So please check us out for that. So we'll say thank you, and again, this recording will go out via email here in a few hours, and then we'll see the webinar recap on Monday. So thank you to Paul.
Thanks, guys.